Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes? Thank you for attending. Today's panel is titled, I have to look it up correctly, the blurring line between culture and commerce. And my name is Josh Baer. Our guest today, Jeffrey Deitch, who's the director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. And while the museum was only founded in, I think, 1979, it is perhaps the repository of the best, if not one of the 2 or 3 best collections of, I'll say, post-war and contemporary art in America, if not in the world. Before that, Jeffrey was the owner of Deitch Projects in New York City, in Soho. So he has the unique position of being involved in the museum world, where maybe a long time ago he was actually a museum curator and a dealer. Uniquely qualified in that he has an MBA. He was one of the founders of the Citibank Art Advisory Group. And I think, like many great museum people and gallerists, I think, Jeffrey, you started as an artist even.
That's right.
So he's touched all sides of this equation.
Well, thank you very much, Josh. Well, first, I want to say what a pleasure to be here on the platform with Josh Baer. We go back 30 years, and I love following what Josh did when he was directing a nonprofit space in New York City, and he had one of the most dynamic galleries. And I remember years ago when he was the only one to show the work of the great artist Jack Goldstein when Jack was in the wilderness, and I was one of the only people to buy the work of Jack Goldstein. So we have a long relationship. And I'll give you a tip if you read the Baer Faxt. So the best way to become a player in the international art world is to be an underbidder on a major work of art. You don't have to spend any money. Just raise your hand, near one of the top bids for one of the big Warhol or other trophy lots, and Josh will list you in the Baer Faxt among the underbidders. And do that a few times, and people will think of you as one of the big players. It'll be very good.
You'll make sure you get a black VIP pass instead of a silver VIP pass, saving you 4 hours at the fair, we hope. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to, those who've been to my talks before may be used to hearing me a little bit more. This is going to be a little bit more my asking Jeffrey some questions about this field. I'll comment on, I hope, on some of his remarks, and then we will open the floor for the last 10 minutes or so for questions from the audience. So, Jeffrey, I'd like to start by asking you, having been in all these different roles, what is it that museums can do that galleries can't, and vice versa? What can galleries do that museums can't?
Well, Josh, one of the reasons for this talk, well, I think one of the reasons you invited me, is that there's less and less difference. And that's what is so astonishing, that a number of you have seen some of the ambitious shows done by big international galleries, and some of them are beyond what a museum can do today. And the getting behind an artist in a big way that galleries used to do, you see museums doing it now. So the lines are increasingly blurred. But the museum is there for history. What we do as directors, curators, patrons of museums, hopefully has resonance extending into history. And in a city like Basel, where the museums are old, you can see that what someone did 150 years ago has impact today in what we see. So the museum, I have to think of what we can do that resonates not just now, but 100 years from now. And that's not really what a gallery is about.
Well, I was once asked when I had a gallery by my director when I was firing them. They said they didn't understand the goals of the gallery. And I said, well, there's simple. There's two, money and history. So I would say that the galleries are involved in history too, but they're involved in a specific history of the artists they represent. You as a museum is a bigger history and a bigger story to be told.
Right. So what a museum can do that a gallery can't, specifically now, is the museum can work with a whole range of artists in the world. And there are ambitious gallery shows now that you've seen that draw in many artists who are not represented by the gallery, but it's a difficult thing to accomplish. At a museum, we can be nonpartisan and work with a whole range of artists and create a statement, a theme that tries to define art for today. And so what I'm trying to do is to articulate art that's out there now, we can understand it better, and then to set the agenda, help to set the agenda for the art of the next decade by drawing on all the different aspects of the commercial and non-commercial art worlds.
But I think it's true when you said, when this title, Blurring the Lines, is that the line of connoisseurship is really been adjusted by galleries doing museum quality shows. And I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I'll defend Jeffrey here a little bit, of some of the press that said, wow, he's a dealer, what does he know about art? And I would defy anybody to challenge his connoisseurship and knowledge of the 20th century with any other museum curator and director. At the same time, I'll say there's some dealers who know an awful lot about the history of art, too. And so this connoisseurship role is merging much more, and galleries are hire museum curators to do shows. They're lending to each other.
Right. Well, there's interesting just on the subject of connoisseurship. Connoisseurship was traditionally the essence of what a curator was involved with. But increasingly, people who come out of current art history programs are much more involved in theory than connoisseurship. And connoisseurship can only really be acquired by being in the field, by being with objects. And I was very lucky when I was in college. I was the apprentice of one of the great print curators, Heinrich Schwarz. And that was an amazing experience looking at all the objects. But I'd say my education in art comes much more from attending every Basel art fair except two since 1979, more than studying in a classroom. There's nothing like looking at all of these objects here and understanding why is this one 100,000 euros and why is that one 200,000 euros, and try to understand differences in quality that are reflected by the price. So it's interesting that I found today dealers and collectors sometimes have more connoisseurship in a traditional way than some of the active curators.
Well, Jeffrey, let's get down to brass tacks a little bit. You know, how's the difference of your relationship, or the relationships in general, that you had as a dealer to your client that you now have as museum director to either your trustees, or I'll just say donors in general?
Okay. Well, I was in a fortunate position that my gallery, and so before when I was a private dealer, I had things that collectors wanted. And so whenever I made a phone call, I got right through. So it was a rude awakening for me to go from the gallery world to the museum world, and then all of a sudden people don't return my phone calls. And like there are some people I called up when I came to LA just because I knew them, they were friends, just wanted to say, let's have dinner. They wouldn't take my phone calls because they figured, oh, he's going to ask me for money. And so, yeah, it's a difference. And talking to a number of my museum colleagues, we're in a difficult position because we're perceived, whenever they see us coming, it's, hi, can you give me a contribution, rather than, hey, let's talk about something interesting in art. And so we're in a difficult compromise position because the museum today is so much about generating the money. So the old days in the museum, it was a very different situation, way beyond the gallery in terms of economic resources. I remember when I started in the 1970s, a gallery couldn't even think of doing a major book about a contemporary artist. No gallery did that. It's only a museum that had the resources to do a big catalog. For opening dinners, they were very austere affairs, kind of a simple thing at the gallery owner's house. It's only a museum that could do a big fancy dinner that was seated. Now it's almost reversed. And so I'll give you an interesting example. I did an exhibition with a young American artist, Theaster Gates. Some of you may have seen the outstanding work that he had at Documenta. Terrific young artist. And so I really believed in him. I worked for a couple of months trying to raise money, and people were interested and asking. The gallery helped us, giving us lists of collectors who had some LA connection. I raised only $15,000 for the show. And so we had a deficit putting it on, which I hadn't anticipated. But it was all new work. Everything in the show was for sale. And I don't begrudge this of the dealer, but I certainly helped putting together like a first-class showroom for Theaster. Everything in the show sold. Some of the pieces were sold twice over because Theaster made an extra version. So the gallery could have made $500,000 on the show if the museum ends up with a deficit. And we couldn't even afford an extra amount to invite Theaster to do an educational program. We'd over budget. So that is a good example of, even with a young artist, the different dynamics between gallery and museum today.
Do you think the donors don't appreciate the value to their artists that they're supporting to help the museums with a little extra, that there's either it's pure philanthropy or it's self-interested philanthropy to make sure that these things happen? I mean, my question is
I'm not,
were you surprised by this?
I was, that was my first year at the museum, so yes, I was surprised, because in the gallery side, I would often say to people, listen, this artist needs some help. Can you buy something in advance of the show so that we can help with the fabrication? And the answer was almost always yes. And so it worked very well. But in the charitable arena, people have lots of other things they're asked about. Many people say, well, much more important to give money to hospitals or to needy children than to the museum, where it's sort of an arena for wealthy people. That's not how I perceive it, but that's often what's in people's minds today. So the economics is very challenging of the museum versus the commercial world versus other nonprofits that are serving areas that may have more extreme needs than the art world.
Now, what have you learned? You've been in this field a long time, from being a museum director that you didn't know before. And I don't know, are there any gallerists in the room?
Oh, there are, yes. We see some old friends.
And within that, what have you learned that would, from this position, that would help a gallerist now from what you've learned in the last, 2 or 3 years? So what didn't you know that you now know? And if you were advising a gallerist from your new position, what could you tell them that's a...
Okay, well, it's very positive things. I mentioned a few things that are challenging, but something that's so inspiring when you're working with a big public is to see how many people are interested in being engaged with art. You have to have the right kind of programming, you have to have the right timing, communicate it the right way, but it's amazing, the new audience. And particularly with a show that I did on the history of graffiti and street art called Art in the Streets, was the biggest attendance in the history of a contemporary art exhibition in LA. We had some days 8,000 plus people coming. And all walks of life. It was remarkable. And I see is that our culture is increasingly visual. People are very sophisticated about nature of images. Generation grows up using iPads and used to using imagery on the computer. And so there's a kind of fluency that I think is equivalent to, back in my generation, people going to rock concerts and absorbing music. So the kind of universal culture that rock music provided, art is increasingly in that place. So that's a very exciting thing.
But you're not taking this sort of Tom Krenz-like position that art is one of our entertainment products? That it's like the competition is Disney?
Well, this is...
Or maybe you aren't.
Well,
maybe that's part of it?
Well, I think there is a new kind of progressive culture. And this new audience does not differentiate so much between a very interesting new movie, a new band, new fashion, new art, new social gaming technology. They're interested in all of it. It's all getting into the same place.
But not as entertainment.
There's a continuum that goes from mindless entertainment to very challenging art, music that's not that entertaining. And most of the audience is someplace on that continuum. And what we have to do with this kind of, to reach this audience with this programming is to challenge them and move them, and not play to the lowest common denominator and be purely entertaining. It's to be engaging and challenging. And my experience that we can do that. So this is a fascinating thing, and the museum is in the forefront and becoming not just a place where people see paintings hung and you have to take your distance. It's a place where you can engage and this kind of culture can thrive. And I mentioned to Josh when we were talking before, there was something amazing that I saw during Art in the Streets. So the big star in street art, as you know, is Banksy. And I very much wanted to have Banksy in the show. So Banksy, I never met him in person, but we did get to communicate by email. And I still don't know.
Banksy may be in the room.
Maybe Banksy's here. I don't know what he looks like. So Banksy had two conditions. He said, I will participate in your exhibition if there is one free day. There has to be a free day, per week. And I want open, free photography. No restrictions on photography. So I found out what it cost us. It lost revenue for one free day on a Monday, the slowest day. I told him, I said, well, we'll probably lose $50,000 during the course of the show. He said, I'll send you a contribution of $50,000. So we had free Mondays, courtesy of Banksy. And we were anticipating that level, 200, 250 people a day. Of course, it went up to 8,000 because of the free Mondays. And the other, but was even more amazing, was the free photography. And so I asked people at the museum, I'm new to this, what is this? How come there are all these signs that say no photography? What's the reason for that? Is it something to do with exploding flashbulbs? And no, it's legal reasons. You don't want to be sued by the artist or the artist rights agency if an image gets someplace. So the only solution was to write to every artist, rights agency, lender. There's one artist's estate I knew was going to be impossible. I didn't write to them. But everyone else I wrote to, 300 or so letters, everyone said yes. So we put a no photography sign next to the one problematic work, but it was unbelievable. So 90% of the people attending were taking cell phone photos, videos, all kinds of things. It was amazing to see. And then they would go home and curate their own show on their Tumblr feed or Twitter or Instagram. And we didn't need to advertise because this just went out into the community. And it became a remarkable thing of people participating. So what am I learning about being in a museum? I'm learning about this amazing new audience who's there to bring art to the next level.
So to ask a last question, then we'll take questions. So again, two parts. You would argue maybe the future of the museum is based largely into social media and the communication with the audience, right?
Well, I learned long ago that if you're going to curate an exhibition, You don't stop just with the curating, putting things on the wall. The communication is about a third of it. And so, yes, for the museum, this kind of connecting with the community, building the community is essential. Because the old game, in America, it was about a small group of wealthy patrons. Well, some of them are still there, fortunately, but this is a shrinking group, and they have many other obligations. The museum cannot depend just on these people.
So what's the future of the gallery?
We need an audience.
What's the future of the gallery business?
The commercial gallery?
Commercial gallery in this new environment. Is it
it's just
a
the
dinosaur?
Same way, no. The same way that art always adapts to the new technology, the new structures. Art continues to expand. The galleries, the museums change the model to connect with this new situation. Now we have this strange challenge, okay, with this vast new audience for art. You see all the people who are here, but let's say take an artist who I admire, like Mark Bradford, who maybe is the most accomplished painter of his generation in Los Angeles. So for every painting that Mark Bradford makes, like years ago, the equivalent, there might be 1 or 2 people to buy that work, like in the 70s, early 80s. Now, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say there are 200 people to buy that work at full price. And so what do? A lot of people get angry, frustrated. And so this is a very interesting challenge for the art market of how to connect with this big audience that wants to participate, where you can really only sell to, or people tend to only sell to the multi-billionaire with their private foundation who can display the work beautifully. So this is a challenge, because I don't think that's the solution. Everybody else is just looking in from the other side of the fence while a few people buy the work. Also, I just want to get into some other things of the challenge to the museum. See, we are so left behind in the dust, not just by powerful galleries that can do anything they want to afford a show. It's the new private museum that is put together by people with tremendous resources. So today, if you ask some artists, would you rather sell to Mr. or Mrs.'s foundation, where they have the most beautiful facility imaginable and the work is perfectly displayed, or sell to the museum, where because we have limited space, we can only show the work once every 4 or 5 years? Sometimes people are going to say, I'd rather sell to the foundation and not to the museum. So we have a lot of challenges, and what I need to try to do is to create a new hybrid model that perhaps has some of the aspects of the gallery, some of the aspects of the private foundation, linking with private foundations to create the new museum model. Because, like every other element of the art support system, you have to keep changing. Like the phenomenon of the art fair here didn't exist like this 20 years ago. And so everyone had to adapt.
Well, before I open it to questions, I would say it was a fascinating choice by MoCA to say, we're going to hire Jeffrey Deitch. It took us all by surprise, because that is sort of the mandate, to say, bring some of that, and it's like, what a great experiment. This is going to be great fun to watch for this next 5 or 10 years to see where it's going to go, because something will happen. And you're just at the beginning of this. Do we have any questions in the audience? There's a microphone. Georgina? Or say who you are if you don't feel shy.
Georgina Adam. There's been a criticism leveled at this current blurring between galleries and museums, is that galleries obviously have to support shows that are held in museums, which either by, say, paying for the catalogue, and which sort of favorises the richer galleries, which means that the richer artists benefit most. I just wondered if you had anything to say about that.
Well, the Theaster Gates show I mentioned, that was now Theaster is with some big league galleries, but at the time he wasn't. And that gallery is supported. And I find that for emerging artists, the galleries that are with them are also very, very supportive. There is a problem, a big problem with museum shows, okay? So to have a museum that doesn't get state support or doesn't have a big endowment, if you want to do a really heavyweight historical survey show that doesn't include popular artists, it's very hard to get corporate support or collector support. And if you want to do a show with a hot artist, the collectors are lining up. They want to help support because they want to be in with the artist because they'd like to get an offering of the next piece. Yeah, so this is a big problem that I'm seeing, so that I'm able to raise money for a show of a big name artist. For a heavy historical survey, it's a giant challenge. So I hope that what can even out is that some of the successful art market businesses, whether it's art fairs, auction houses, become aware of this and would like to allocate more of their revenue to helping the museum, which is necessary because the whole field degenerates if we don't have the great historical museum shows.
And I would say, Georgina, the reality now is those big mega galleries are working with 30, 40, 50 artists. So as they're congregating to these fewer and fewer places, automatically those are going to be either the more critically revered artists or commercially revered artists. So they're automatically going to be chosen for more shows because it's all pushing up. And it's kind of an inevitable fact here. Do we have another question?
English. So how do you do when you have for a judge new ideas done by French artists about the French theory? I know an artist who was the friend of Roland Barthes, Derrida, Deleuze, where we were in his studio in his exhibition in Paris, and the brightly curator in France were very fond about art, but not about the philosophy. So they lose all the very important works done by French artists named Laucan, like Gauguin, the same music as Gauguin, and now he's in advance about ideas of our time, very cutting edge, and he had a lecture in Pompidou Center with a scientist about chaos theory, nonlinear theory, and he do art with the geometry of Einstein. Einstein, Lobachevsky,
what is your question,
and Riemann.
please?
And the question, what could you do that, challenge, what could you be faced with a problem like that?
Well, let me take a stab at it on Jeffrey's behalf. I mean, in Europe, with the state government supporting so many of the cultural institutions, there's a very different system there. Some of them are more interested in preserving the cultural patrimony of that country, and France tends to think that way a little bit more. I would think American institutions are a little bit more nimble sometimes. I don't know.
Well, in Los Angeles, we're very lucky to have the support of the Getty Foundation to help us with. They have an incredible research archive, and this mega exhibition project, Pacific Standard Time, was about going into the archive and the documentation of the semi-forgotten radical LA artists of the 70s. So that was a very interesting project. And but you need the resources of the Getty or university to do that.
Do we have another question here someplace?
Hi, my name is Morgan, and I was wondering what advice you have for young collectors, and is that advice different today than it would be in the past?
Okay, so, well, first advice is there are many art consultants who will give you their list. You need to buy this person, that person, and so today we have like the bestseller list that you used to only have for books or, for like the top grossing movies. But the art world, the opportunities are so big. And so my advice is to really find your own vision through the art that's out there. And don't collect what everyone else is collecting, to really connect with works that speak to you. And so you put together a group of works over years that really reflect your personality.
As an art advisor, which is my main job, I would have to say that there are a couple of situations. If you're buying things that you love and you're happy to have forever, you can't go wrong. If for everybody there's a certain amount of money where they hit a threshold where it becomes real money for them. That could be $10,000, that could be $1 million, that could be $10 million. At that stage, then I ask my clients, where I say, we want something that 20 years from now that a museum would be happy to have as a gift. I'm not saying it'd be worth more. I'm not saying somebody would buy it to look out towards history. That's a big standard if you're interested in collecting emerging artists. It's an impossible standard. So it's a complex question. How do you get information? Where do you go? I mean, there's so many parts to it that are way before which art to buy.
Can I also add to that answer? Think wide rather than think narrow. So like at an art fair here, one way to do it is you're like looking at every single thing individually. Another way, you go through this fair and look through and say, what patterns do I see here? Is there something big that's going on? And I think it's so exciting to be in on that discovery of something big, of the big pattern, of the big thing that's emerging, and build a collection that reflects that reflects something that's larger than individual artists.
Another question? In the middle?
Hi, Heidi Lee. I just wanted to know, you mentioned earlier that you were influenced by Heinrich Schraubs, I think.
Right.
And I was wondering if there were any museum directors today or in the past that might have some similar kind of
sure.
inspiration.
There are many great models. So I would advise from some of you who are interested in the field to read the biography of Chick Austin, who was the director of the Wadsworth Atheneum, my hometown, Hartford, Connecticut. And he created the first modern museum in America and brought the Virgil Thompson Four Saints, Gertrude Stein Four Saints in Three Acts production to open the museum. I was also very influenced by great director of painting and sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art, Bill Rubin, and learned a lot of connoisseurship from him. I was very lucky that he decided that I was one of the people to whom he would transfer some of this knowledge that you couldn't teach in the classroom. And so we had a regular Monday night dinner at the key table on the mezzanine at Mr. Chow that he demanded. And so that was special. And today there are many colleagues I'm inspired by, very inspired by Uto Kietelman's live museum exhibition a few years ago, and I'm determined to work with Udo to bring the live museum exhibition to Los Angeles.
Yesterday when we were talking about galleries, and how many people here know the gallerist Anthony Dauphin, by show of hands? Okay, how many never heard of him?
Most.
Okay, so Jeff and I would agree that in the 80s and 90s, he had the best gallery in the world, exhibition program. And half of you have never heard of him. So things go quickly. I mean, he retired, 5 years ago? 10 years ago?
He retired in 2001.
2001.
So this was a while ago. So we were discussing this way of what's the difference between a gallery and a museum, and even the greatest gallery in the world of its time, it's the reputation sort of slowly dissipates, where in a museum, we're really there forever and thinking that way.
I think we have time for one more question, if somebody has the mic, and then we'll be available for offline questions for a few minutes. Is there anybody else who has a question? Stefan, wait for the mic, please.
I'm Stefan Hildebrand. Jeffrey, you once said in an interview, the art world used to be a community, now it's an industry.
Yes.
And I found that very poignant, and I think you said that very briefly before you went to California. And to me, it was kind of a synonym for how the art world was changing. And do you think that it's just a subjective feeling of each generation that they feel an industry or a community is changing dramatically, or is it a shift, a tectonic shift in the art world, in the commercial and non-commercial display and communication of art?
Well, thank you. That's an excellent question. So many people, including me, are nostalgic for, for me, it's the 1970s. Some people, it's the 50s, when the art world was a small community. And in New York City, in Soho in the mid-70s, there were 5-6 galleries, Paula Cooper, Sana Ben-Castelli, John Weber, where I worked, and that's all you needed to follow the whole world of art. And you would meet basically everyone in the art world out there on the sidewalk on a Saturday afternoon. And so it was a remarkable thing. But even then, I always was idealistic that art could enhance people's lives, that it would be great if art could be even bigger. And I used to, whenever Joseph Beuys was in New York, I would attend the lectures and raptly listen about how everyone could be an artist. Well, you know what? That's happened. And
there's more artists in America than lawyers. And there's more artists working in New York City right today than lived through the entire Renaissance.
So
that's a lot of artists.
So it's a really remarkable thing how this has expanded. For me, it's astonishing. When I was here having a booth or at Art Basel, Miami Beach, to just see the thousands of people pour in, and remembering that at the John Weber Gallery in the 70s, we might have 5 visitors in one day and think that was pretty good. So my idealism continues. So I think it's great that all these people can have their lives enhanced by art, and I see art becoming more and more of an essential international language, tying together people from different continents. So that's really the biggest news story in art, of China and India and other nations joining the international art dialogue. We can't go back. So I think we have to embrace what we have and shift our institutions and our attitudes to make art and continue to make art a positive, life-enhancing experience.
I think that's a perfect place to stop. It's such an optimistic point. So thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of the fair, and we'll see you again next year.
Thank you very much, Josh. Thank you.